In 2011, a company in Switzerland announced that more than half of all men in Western Europe were related to Tutankhamun. Not descended from Egypt, not vaguely connected, related to him, to that face, in that mask, in that tomb. The story went everywhere. It is still going. If you have ever taken a DNA test or thought about taking one, there is a good chance you have seen some version of it. Here is the part almost nobody reports. Tutankhamun's Y-chromosome has never been published. Not in 2010, not since. The scientists who examined his body did not release it. So where did the number come from? A company called IGENIA, that's A-I-E-D-A, NIA, took screenshots of a Discovery Channel documentary. They looked at data displayed on a screen, in a television program, and read a result off it. And then they sold DNA kits. One of the geneticists who worked on the actual mummies, Carsten Pusch, said publicly that it looked like an attempt to use Tutankhamun's fame to move product. That is the origin of the claim. A screenshot, a press release, a shopping cart. Now, if that is false, and it is, then the real question is still sitting there, unanswered. And it is a much better question. Who does descend from the people who built the pyramids? Because somebody must. Egypt was not empty. It has never been empty. There are 100 million people living there this morning, and for 2 centuries a version of the answer has been argued over in seminar rooms and comment sections without very much evidence on either side. That changed. Quietly, in the last few years, 3 separate teams of scientists went and got the evidence. One of them opened a jar. One of them tested 151 mummies, and one of them looked at a boy king's family and found something so uncomfortable that other scientists wrote in to object. By the end of this, you will have the honest answer, including the part about Tutankhamun himself, which is not what you have been told, and which almost nobody says out loud. Let's start where the myth starts, with him. In 2010, a team led by Zia Hawass published a study in the Journal of the American Medical Association. They examined 11 royal mummies, Tutankhamun, 5 thought to be his relatives, and 5 earlier royals as a control. They were looking for 2 things: who he was related to, and what killed him. What they reported was this. His father, they concluded, was the man in tomb KV55, a body most Egyptologists identify as Akhenaten, the pharaoh who tried to replace Egypt's gods with a single sun disk. His mother was a woman known only as the Younger Lady, from tomb KV35. She has no name. She has never had a name. Think about that for a moment, because it tells you something about how history gets kept. We know the names of his father's gods. We know the name of his father's city. We know what his father believed about the sun. And the woman who carried him, whose face is intact enough that you can look at it in a photograph today, is filed under a description of her approximate age. She was found in a side chamber, laid out beside 2 other bodies, and for over a century nobody knew who she was. It took genetic testing to establish that this anonymous woman was the mother of the most famous pharaoh in history. And it established something else about her, which is the part that gets repeated most and understood least. According to the study, those 2 people, his mother and his father, were full brother and sister, both children of Amenhotep III and Queen Tiye. Now, an honest note, because this channel does not overclaim. Sibling marriage in Egyptian royalty was not a scandal. It was policy. The royal line was considered divine, and the reasoning was that divinity should not be diluted. This was a religious position, held for centuries, and the people involved were not hiding it. But biology does not care about theology. The same study reported that Tutankhamun had a club foot. That one foot was deformed badly enough that he could not walk properly. And there is supporting evidence for this beyond the scan. Over 130 walking sticks were buried with him. For a long time, those were read as symbols of authority. The bone tells a different story. He needed them. They also found bone tissue that had died from lack of blood supply, and they recovered DNA from Plasmodium falciparum, the parasite that causes the most dangerous form of malaria, from his tissue. A boy with a deformed foot dying bone, and malaria. Dead at around 19. Now here is where I have to stop and be straight with you. That study is disputed, not by cranks, by serious people. Two geneticists, Aileen Lorenzen and ESSK Villers-Lev, wrote to the Journal of the American Medical Association, questioning the reliability of the genetic data, and therefore the conclusions drawn from it. Their objection was about whether DNA that old, in that climate, could be read as confidently as the authors claimed. So everything in the last 2 minutes carries a label, and the label is disputed. It is published, it is peer-reviewed, it is the best-known study of its kind, and it is contested. I would rather you hear that from me than find it later. Hold that thought, because the next part comes from the same study, and it is the part that quietly ends the entire myth we started with. There were 2 other bodies in Tutankhamun's tomb. Not treasure, not servants. 2 tiny mummified infants, in 2 small coffins, placed inside the burial chamber with him. The same DNA work identified them. They were his daughters, both stillborn. One at around 5 months, one near full term. That is the whole of it. That is his entire posterity. A boy who ruled a superpower, who has been photographed and filmed and merchandised more than almost any human being who has ever lived, left 2 children who never drew a breath, and they were buried in boxes at his feet. So, which European families descend from Tutankhamun's bloodline? None of them. Nobody does. There is no bloodline. It ended in that room, around 1323 BC, and it has been ended for 3,300 years. And I want to give you the second reason for saying that, because I have already told you the DNA study is contested, and I am not going to lean the whole thing on one paper. You do not actually need the genetics here. You can get there from the throne. When Tutankhamun died, the crown did not pass to a son. It went to I, an elderly court official, who had no claim by birth. And when I died, it went to Horemheb, a general, who also had no claim by birth. Neither of them was his child. Horemheb then spent his reign systematically scrubbing the whole Amarna family out of the record, the monuments, the king lists, the inscriptions. A dynasty with an heir does not hand the throne to 2 unrelated officials in a row. The historians knew the line had run out long before anybody opened a tomb with a swab. So, the DNA says the daughters were his and they were stillborn. The succession says there was nobody left to inherit. Those are 2 separate kinds of evidence pointing at the same wall. Which means the claim we opened with is not just unproven. It is not just badly sourced. It is describing a relationship to a man whose family died with him. And it makes you wonder what else people assume about ancient Egypt that has never actually been checked. Because the biggest assumption of all is not about Tutankhamun, it is about everybody else. Here is the assumption. I want you to notice whether you hold it, because most people do, and most people have never examined it. The assumption is that the ancient Egyptians are gone. Not dead, gone, replaced. That the people who cut the pyramids out of the ground were one population, and that wave after wave of conquest washed them away and left somebody else standing in the same place. And you can see why the idea took hold. Look at the list. The Assyrians came, the Persians came, and then came back. Alexander came, and his general Ptolemy stayed and founded a Greek dynasty that ruled for 300 years. Rome came. The Arab conquest came in the 7th century. The Ottomans came, the French came, the British came. That is not a country with a difficult history. That is a country that has been the prize in somebody else's war for 2,500 years. And here is the detail that makes the point better than any list of invasions. Cleopatra. When you picture an Egyptian queen, you almost certainly picture her. She is the most famous Egyptian who has ever lived. She is on the coins, in the plays, in the films. She was not Egyptian. Cleopatra VII was Macedonian Greek. Her family, the Ptolemies, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals, who took Egypt when the empire was carved up after Alexander died. They ruled for nearly 300 years, and for most of that time they ruled in Greek. They married each other, kept the line Macedonian, ran the country from a Greek city on the coast, and by all accounts did not learn the language of the people they governed. Plutarch tells us that Cleopatra was the exception, that she was the first of her house in 3 centuries to actually speak Egyptian. 300 years of rule, and speaking the local language was remarkable enough that it was written down as a personal quality. That is what foreign rule in Egypt actually looked like: a palace at the top, speaking another language, for centuries at a time, and underneath it, a country that carried on. So the natural conclusion is that the original population must have been overwhelmed somewhere in there. Enough waves, enough centuries, enough armies, and surely the people at the bottom are eventually replaced by the people who kept arriving. That is the assumption. It sounds obvious, and for 200 years there was no way on earth to check it. For most of the last century nobody could test that. Egypt's climate is the reason. DNA is a long, fragile molecule, and from the moment something dies it begins breaking into shorter and shorter pieces. 2 things speed that up more than anything else: heat and moisture. Egypt supplies both, searing summers and the annual damp of the river valley. It is close to the worst combination there is. That is the irony of the whole field. Egypt gave archaeology more preserved human bodies than anywhere else on earth. Thousands of them, wrapped, cataloged, sitting in museums. And for decade after decade, the one thing those bodies would not give up was the information inside them. Researchers tried. The results came back degraded, or contaminated by the hands of everyone who had handled the remains since the 1800s, or simply empty. You could look an ancient Egyptian in the face and not be able to read a single reliable line of his genome. Then somebody found a body in a jar. Near a village called New Wayrat, in a rock-cut tomb, a man had been buried inside a large ceramic vessel. That vessel is the reason we can have this conversation. Sealed in pottery, inside cut rock, his remains were held at a stable temperature for 4,500 years. In 2025, a team published his complete genome in the journal Nature, the first whole genome ever recovered from ancient Egypt. Radiocarbon dating puts him between 2855 and 2570 BC. Stop on that for a second. That is not the Egypt of Cleopatra, or Tutankhamun, or Ramesses. Those people are all far in his future. He was alive at the join between the early dynastic period and the Old Kingdom. He was walking around while the first pyramids were being raised. And his DNA says this: roughly 80% of his ancestry traces to ancient North African populations. Roughly 20% traces to the Eastern Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia, what is now Iraq. Now, historians had suspected a connection between early Egypt and Mesopotamia for a very long time. They had pottery, they had trade goods, they had motifs in art that looked borrowed. What they did not have was a person. Now there is a person. One man, in a jar, carrying the evidence in his cells. But one man is one man, and I want to be careful here, because a single genome is a single genome. It tells you about him, and it hints about his world, and the difference between those 2 things is where a lot of bad history gets made. To answer the real question, you do not need one body. You need 151. At a site called Abusir el-Meleq in Middle Egypt, there is a burial ground that was used for a very long time. A team led by Verena Schuenemann sampled 151 mummies from it and published the results in Nature Communications in 2017. They recovered 90 complete mitochondrial genomes and genome-wide data from 3 individuals. The important thing is not the number of bodies, it is the span. Those mummies date from roughly 1400 years before Christ to 400 years after. That is around 18 centuries, 1800 years, in one cemetery, sampled from end to end. Think about what happens inside that window. At the start, Egypt is ruled by its own new kingdom pharaohs. Then the Assyrians invade. Then the Persians take the country. Then Alexander arrives, and after him, 3 centuries of Greek-speaking Ptolemaic rule, ending with Cleopatra. Then Rome annexes the whole thing and runs it as a province for another 400 years. 4 foreign empires, 18 centuries, all of it inside the sample. So if conquest replaces populations, and that is the assumption almost everyone carries, this is where you would see it. You would see the genetics shift, a break, a new profile arriving with a new flag. Here is what they found. Complete genetic continuity, across the whole span, through all of it. The population at the end of the window is genetically the population at the start of it. The empires came and took the taxes and put their faces on the coins and went. The people stayed. Now, the honest limits, because they matter and because you deserve them. This is one cemetery, in one region, Middle Egypt, not the whole country. The ancient samples cluster most closely with populations of the ancient Near East, the Levant, and Anatolia. And a burial ground is not a census. It tells you about the people buried there. Other regions could differ, and the authors say so themselves. But within that window, in that place, the answer is not ambiguous. Nobody was replaced. Which brings us to the only question left, the one that started all this. If the ancient population did not go anywhere, where is it now? The same study compared those mummy genomes to living people. Modern Egyptians share between 80 and 90% of their ancestry with the ancient individuals from that cemetery. 80 to 90%. The people living along that river today are, overwhelmingly, the descendants of the people who were living along it 3,000 years ago. Not a metaphor, not a national story, a measurement, in a peer-reviewed journal. And the study went further, into territory that people argue about very loudly online, so I am going to report it exactly as it was published, and add nothing. Modern Egyptians carry approximately 8% more sub-Saharan African ancestry than the ancient individuals from Abusir, el-Meleq. The authors conclude that this gene flow increased within the last 2,000 years, in the period after Roman rule. That is the change. That is what actually moved, not a replacement, an addition of roughly 8%, arriving in the most recent stretch of a very long story. And one more finding, because it is the one that surprises people most. Coptic Egyptians, the Christian minority, who have often been described, by themselves and by others, as the most direct continuation of the ancient population, were compared with Muslim Egyptians. Genetically, the two communities share the same basic ancestral profile. The dividing line that people have argued over for a century is a line of faith and language. It is not a line of descent. So, let us go back to where we started and answer the question properly. Are half of Europe's men related to Tutankhamun? No. The claim came from a company reading a television screen, and Tutankhamun's Y-chromosome has never been released. Which European families descend from his bloodline? None. He had 2 daughters. Both were stillborn. They are in the tomb with him. The line stopped there. Then who does descend from the people who built the pyramids? The people who live in Egypt. That is the answer. And it is almost aggressively unglamorous, and that is exactly why nobody sells it to you. There is no kit for it. There is no certificate. You cannot be told, for $99, that you are secretly a pharaoh, because the people who are actually descended from that world are not secret and never were. They have been standing in the same place the entire time, being conquered by everybody, and outlasting all of them. One last honest note, and then I will let you go. I want to say something about percentages, because this entire subject is drowning in them, and almost nobody explains what they are. When a test tells you that you are 12% something, it is not telling you that 12% of your ancestors came from a place. It is telling you that 12% of the markers it looked at resemble the reference group it is comparing you against. And that reference group is a set of living volunteers, sampled recently, whose own ancestors moved around exactly as much as yours did. Change the reference panel, and the number changes. Add samples from a region, and the number changes. That is not a flaw being hidden from you. It is how the method works, and the scientists publishing these papers say so in the papers. Which is why the studies in this video are careful, in a way the press release in the opening was not. They do not say a person is a percentage of something. They say this population, at this site, in this window, sits closest to these other populations, with these limits, and here is our sample size. That is a much less exciting sentence. It is also the difference between a finding and a product. A surname is a thread, not proof. So is a haplogroup. So is a percentage on a pie chart. Any single marker can put you in a very large room with a very large number of strangers, and it cannot tell you which chair was your great-grandmother's. The studies in this video are careful about that. The company in the opening was not. That difference is the whole difference. If you found this useful, tell me where you are watching from, and tell me one thing your family has always said about where you come from. The claim, the story, the thing that gets repeated at funerals. I read them all, and the ones that come up most often become episodes. Next time, we are going somewhere much closer to home. There is a legal category in old German records that marked certain families as dishonorable, barred from the guilds, refused burial with their neighbors, and one of the most common surnames in the world is on the list. That is the next one. Until then, be careful what you buy from a screenshot.